Uh, Welcome, everyone. I'm Gabriella Gallagher, the National Chair of Canadian Friends of Peace Now. Our organization is the Canadian partner to Peace Now, Shalom Achav, which is Israel's leading peace movement and which promotes the two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. You can find out more about us on our website, peacenowcanada.org. We really hope you will consider supporting us with a donation, which you can do via the donate page on our website. We rely entirely on donations from people like you. Later on, we will have time for audience questions. Please type your questions at any time using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. Please make your question as concise as you can. Our webinar is being recorded and will be posted to our website. Now, before we get to today's webinar, I wanted to share with you that I have agreed to run for the Hatikva Canada slate in the upcoming Canadian Zionist Federation election. I'm very concerned about the path the current Israeli government is taking and how it endangers the two-state solution. Voting for this slate will be online from June 5th to 15th. Hatikva is the only independent liberal Zionist slate. Its views and values closely align with my own and with those of Canadian Friends of Peace Now. You can learn much more and sign up to vote on Hatikva Canada's website, which is www.votehatikva.ca. And it's a simple process. And we're going to put the website into our chat. I also wanted to mention that Hatikva Canada is holding a brief Zoom session later today at 2:30 Eastern Time with special guests Yair Golan and Claire Frankel. The webinar is called A New Vision for Israel's Security and Democracy, and we're going to put the registration link in our message box for you too. So that's it for announcements. It's now my great honor to introduce our guest, Aziz Al-Gashian. Aziz is an independent researcher living in Saudi Arabia. He is an expert in Saudi policy, Saudi-Israeli relations, and Arab-Israeli relations more generally. Currently, he is a non-resident fellow at the Arab Gulf States Institute in Washington. He holds many other distinguished positions and has a very impressive bio, but I won't get into more detail because we want to hear from our guest. So welcome, Aziz. Thank you so much for joining us. And before I get into my first question, I'll just ask you something that we talked about before, and that is that you're an independent researcher. What does that mean, please?
Well, firstly, I just want to say thank you, Gabriella, and the Canada Peace Friends for Peace Now. I really appreciate you all, and I appreciate this invitation. So, what I would say is that yes, I am an independent researcher, as in I am very much representing my own ideas and myself, and so I am someone who is dedicated to trying to understand the nuances of this subject, the nuances of this topic. And therefore, I thought it was about, the best way to do this was to chart my own way in being an independent researcher.
Thank you. Okay, so my first question that gets into the meat of what we want to talk about is, could you bring us a little bit up to date on the Israeli-Saudi relationship? What is it? What has it been like, and what is it like now?
Well, I would say currently it is definitely the worst it's been since for some time. I remember being a child when there was when the second Intifada started in 2000, and I was in Saudi Arabia, and the environment then is very reminiscent to the environment now, or in the environment now reminded me of that time where there was a great deal of grievance between them. What I would say also is that, the nature of Saudi-Israeli relations, it's something that I think many people are overlook. It's an unfixed relationship. It's not a linear relationship, and this is where I think a lot of people tend to make the mistake that this relationship is ebbs and flows, and it's constantly, moving, improving at sometimes. The perceptions tend to converge, and then all of a sudden something happens, and then you have this kind of withdrawal. So this is certainly not fixed. And one of the other things about this relationship also is that I wouldn't call it a bilateral relationship nor a trilateral relationship. I think one of the conclusions I came to in uh, in recent years is that this is what I would call a semi trilateral relationship, because there is always the role of the United States involved. And whenever there's any kind of Saudi pragmatism towards Israel, it's not necessarily a message to Israel itself, but actually it's due to pragmatism, communicating a particular pragmatism about Israel that has political resonance in the United States. So this causes a great deal of, I would say, sometimes confusion and elusivity in this relationship. So, but to circle back to answer your question, I think that the relationship has been very tense. And I don't remember in recent years there's been such frustration and such um, a strong tone towards Israel from the Saudi perspective, and you could see that clearly from the Saudi statements time and again. So it's quite a difficult time for the relationship.
Okay. How does well, first of all, is normalization off the table altogether? And if not, do the Saudi, other than the US pleasing the US,
Hmm.
are the Saudis interested in any way in normalization?
It's an interesting question because normalization was offered in actually in the mid 1990s, but it was always predicated on a solution or some sort of solution. Then, actually, the solution was interesting that had Israel and Syria made peace, there would have been normalization. Now, this then evolved into the 2002 peace initiative that we all hear time and again, the Arab Peace Initiative. And that's when normal relations was offered there. So the Saudi position has always been the following. We are ready to normalize once one, two, and three happen. We're ready to normalize if this happens. We're ready to normalize, so it's a conditional normalization. I wouldn't say it was off the table because it's always predicated on a solution. Now, I think in 2020, with the Abraham Accords, as many people assume or think that actually brought Saudi Arabia and Israel closer. In fact, I think what it did is that it made things more difficult for normalization because Saudi Arabia now wanted something from the United States, because that's what the Abraham Accords actually did. It was that promise of the F-35s, and for Morocco, it was, recognition of the Western Sahara, etc. And so I think what it did was that the United States began, the burden of concessions shifted from Israel to the United States. And Saudis then wanted demands, very lofty demands from the United States, but also from Israel. So this is where it becomes very difficult. Right now, normalization is dependent on two things. Firstly, the Israel concessions to Palestinians and the Palestinian state and dedication to statehood. Um, So that's one, and we all know this is very difficult now. But the second thing from the United States is basically the treaty. They wanted a defense treaty, and which is very difficult in getting in itself because it requires 67 votes in the Senate. So the political landscape in the United States is also not ripe for getting what Saudis want for normalization. So normalization is facing a very steep hill. And what I would also say, just to conclude this question, or conclude this answer, is that I mean, it is people probably over or underestimate how difficult it has become because I think the perception of Israel has become very negative here in Saudi Arabia. Very, very negative. And as a student or a researcher that was in the UK doing most of my studies there, that was something that didn't dawn on me till I came here to see how difficult this actually, this decision really is. So while the principle of normalization is there, um, the the dynamics seem to be facing the other way around.
Well, let me ask you a tricky question,
Mm,
perhaps, and that is because I think some people would wonder, you know, if the leader of Saudi Arabia, who is sort of a supreme power there, wants to do something, he can do whatever he wants, and what people around him think, or the people on the street think, doesn't matter.
mm.
And people might also think, wonder, well, the Bahrain and the UAE made normalization. Why not Saudi Arabia? So what? Could you address that, please?
Yeah, sure. People would assume that, and indeed, I think the king here has the last say. But this question, people who would ask this question wonder kind of um, are probably are not taking into account enough the politics within this structure of governance and the social contract. There are constituencies that any leader in Saudi has to adhere to. And also, this is part and parcel of kind of the negotiation and dealing with the Saudi state in the broad sense, or the Saudi society. So, time and again, when we see all these different things play out on TV, when we hear that Saudi Arabia has always been a stalwart defender of the Arab Peace Initiative, it was actually resulted from the Arab Peace Initiative. The Arab Peace Initiative was based on the Saudi Peace Initiative a month before. Um, this then highlights, I think, the obstacles for such a normalization. The United Arab Emirates has a very different dynamic than Saudi Arabia, and they also have a different outlook of Saudi Arabia, um, which is, of course, they don't have, I think, the same um, um, dynamic regarding the population. I mean, it's a far smaller population. Most of the population there are not Emirati. Um, but I think more pertinently, uh, the UAE, or United Arab Emirates, has always had a tendency or a desire to diversify relations within the region, and Israel played a part in that. Saudi Arabia doesn't view Israel as the UAE did. Saudi Arabia views Israel as part of a broader American file, which makes it more elusive and confusing sometimes to understand. But I would say, each and every these countries that normalize relations with Israel had different motivations. I mean, Bahrain had a security desire. They didn't actually get anything from the United States, but because they wanted to strengthen ties with Israel as a matter of security. And now they were probably the only country to normalize relations as a result of their perceived Iranian threat. The UAE didn't. That was not part of their motivation to normalize relations. So and I appreciate this question because a lot of the times people will say, the Gulf, treat it as if it's one monolithic entity, or the GCC as if it's one monolithic entity, and there's 6 countries. So I'll just name them quickly: Saudi Arabia, Oman, when we will go from the size, then the United Arab Emirates, then Qatar, then Kuwait, then Bahrain. And so the ones that actually have normalized relations is the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. Oman was actually the first country that had relations with Israel, but they've done things very quietly. Um, Qatar also had the first relations to be open. So all these different countries had different calculations. So I would say, not only this, Gabriela, but Saudi Arabia is also going through a transformational period where there's a great deal of, fundamental changes, and to have a normalization with Israel on top of all of this may be too much to ask uh, for now. So it really is a challenge.
Okay, thank you. Just briefly, maybe, um, can you speak about the Iran part of the equation? Because I think people also assume that Israel and Saudi Arabia would be aligned in because of their fear of Iran.
To be honest, that was one of the things that I dispelled when I first began my research in the UK in 2014. I was looking at this relationship and saying, well, the Saudi desire to normalize relations with Israel is probably due to Iran. And I remember, of course, during the heart of or during the midst of the Arab Spring, I was saying, wow, it's going to happen anytime soon. It's going to happen anytime soon. This is going to happen. It's going to happen. And then April or March 2014, the tensions simmered and then they stopped between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And then it calmed down. The Saudi foreign minister then invited the Iranian foreign minister. And then when they invited the Iranian foreign minister, they invited them. And they then began to do things and to address their security concern differently. And so that made me think, is this motivation, a desire to normalize relations with Israel, really due to Iran? I don't think so. And that's one of the reasons why people would assume this, is that the enemy of my enemy is my friend kind of logic. And Saudi doesn't have that. It doesn't use that logic in this regard. And why? Because it's, in my opinion, a very short-term tactical logic. For Saudi Arabia, and it became clear in 2022 that Iran is still its main security concern, but dialogue with Iran is the way forward, rather than kind of aligning with Israel, as some may have said before. Because I think the perception of Israel, especially with this government and Netanyahu, is one that of a security concern exasperator. That he became a security burden. An association with this government is just too costly for the security. So it, it the normalization with Israel cannot avoid the Palestinian issue. Now, what that issue is, how much can they get on the Palestinian issue? This is up for debate and discussion. But a lot of the times people will try to say and hold on to the idea that the reason why Saudi Arabia and Israel will normalize relations because of Iran is probably wishful thinking by many to try to avoid the Palestinian issue. And yet again, we've seen that the Palestinian issue cannot be circumnavigated, it cannot be ignored.
Okay, why don't we dig into a little bit what Saudi Arabia actually wants? When you alluded to the Palestinian
Yeah,
package that
yeah,
it hopes to achieve.
yeah. So this is an interesting question. Of course, our position policy has always been 1967, Palestinian state on 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. This has always been the official line. But when one looks deeper into this, the the crux of the Saudi position is actually a very interesting one because it's one of principle, not of details. And what do I mean by this? So when many people try to ask, well, what is enough for Saudi? Uh, what is enough for the Palestinian on the Palestinian issue? The reality is they will say, and they've consistently said this, that it's not up to us to say what is enough. It's up to them, to the Palestinians, the PA, to tell us what is enough, what is good enough. So even in discussions regarding kind of the formula and the land swaps and the aspects of settlements and the aspects of all these kind of details and the nitty-gritty of Palestinian-Israeli final status discussions, the Saudis were not involved in any of this, nor do they want to be involved. And therefore, they take this kind of leading from the backside and saying, listen, you sort it out with them. What's good for them is good for us. So this is then part of the whole negotiation. I think just before October 7th, there was, as you all know, there was that kind of discussion regarding normalization and according to kind of the Biden the grand bargain or the mega deal. And in my opinion, I think, there was this aspect where the Saudis and the United States were talking about getting that treaty that they wanted and the nuclear capabilities and the nuclear cooperation. And then the question was, what is on the Palestinian aspect? The Palestinians, the PA, then actually played ball, in my opinion. They said, listen, okay, we're not gonna hold on to this maximalist demands. We're gonna ask for some bits and bobs from Area B to Area C. We're gonna ask for a Saudi mission, non-resident mission. So they asked for some of these things for the PA to say, you know what, any Saudi-Israeli normalization will get Palestinian cover. Now that in itself is up for negotiation. And a lot of the times when I say this to people, they get very frustrated with me because they're like, you're not giving us an answer. And I'm like, well, I'm giving you precisely the answer, which is not a precise one. It's always up for negotiation, which speaks to the nature of Saudi policy towards Israel. It's never fixed. It's always kind of up and down, left and right. It's always unfixed. It's always evolving. So there cannot be normalization. And I don't see a normalization without a Palestinian cover to it, without Palestinians or the PA saying, hey, this is good enough. Now, what would it take for that to happen? That's going to be up for negotiation.
Okay, you've mentioned the PA a number of times, the Palestinian Authority.
Yep.
So that assumes, I guess, that the Saudis view the PA as the legitimate leadership. What is a few questions here. How do the Saudis feel about Hamas? What do they officially say about October 7th, if anything? And yeah, if you could talk about that a little bit, and yes, and what have they been saying about the Gaza war?
Yeah. So how they look at Hamas, I could say there's no love lost between Saudi Arabia and Hamas. There isn't, warmth in that relationship. Because, of course, for Hamas's ideological tendencies or ideological worldview, but also the fact that sometimes there are these recklessness, what we consider reckless behaviors that actually beget more harm to innocent people and to Palestinians, mostly to Palestinians. However, one has to say it's not that simple because Hamas, while there is no love lost for Hamas, the Saudis do understand that this is a result of an occupation, and that there is an occupation that is quite hideous, quite frankly, to put it lightly. And as a result, this is what the Saudis have been saying. The Saudis have been saying, listen, there cannot be security for anybody in the region while there is this occupation continuing. And this has been consistently said. When October 7th happened, there was a quick response from the Saudis, from the Saudi foreign ministry. And usually the Saudi foreign ministry, one of the things that I kind of look at is that they kind of don't rush into statements at times. They wait, they take their time, they see how things are evolving, and that's part of their balancing approach. This time it wasn't. It was a very quick response. I think it was a quick response because I think they wanted to avoid anybody misinterpreting their silence. But when the response happened, it was basically saying, we've been warning about this. We've been saying this time and again. We've been saying that these provocations, that word provocations, been taking, it's been happening too much. We've been saying that the situation is going to lead to some sort of explosion, and it did. And we've been saying this. So you could hear, you could almost sense this frustration coming out of the Saudi statement. And also, it's important to note that when one looks at the Saudi statements previous to that, ever since the government, this current government in Israel happened or took power, the Saudi statements of condemnation about Israel skyrocketed. I've never seen so many criticisms or statements denouncing the Israeli government. So that was the position, and I think the position when it came to what they're saying now, I'll say it in two things. There's one about normalization, and then there's one about the war. The one about the war basically was that, as you could expect, it was very much denouncing this war. It was calling for not just, not calling just to have a ceasefire, and to say that this is one of the symptoms of having a lack of a political horizon. But this is now also becoming double standards in the West. The double standards in the West have allowed these people that basically Israel is allowed to do this, but when it came to Ukraine, everybody kind of went to kind of defended the Ukraine, and that's where the Saudi and the Arab states were actually playing on. They were saying that there was an international hypocrisy. But then it's important to know also with normalization that the Saudis were still talks about trying to get a ceasefire so they could get that normalization deal, because they were still talking and negotiating about that treaty. But that couldn't have happened without a ceasefire. And what the Saudis wanted was a clear dedication from Israel about the two-state solution. Clearly, as you all know more than I would, that was probably a non-starter. And therefore, immediately, I think the language became more sharper, and it became basically from, it became from kind of like this is a heinous war, and there's a lot of war crimes, to genocide. And that's when I think May of last year, when we start to first hear the term genocide come out officially from the Saudis. So, and they've maintained that. And so it's just become more sharper. And I'll just say one more thing about this. And the Netanyahu statements about the Gaza Riviera, about how if the Saudis really want a Palestinian state, then maybe they should have a Palestinian state on their land, kind of pushed the Saudis into a real different corner, and have really demonized the Israeli government to a level that was unprecedented, in my opinion. Unprecedented, because it became, I won't say insulting, but it became very sharp criticism about the psyche, the psychology, and the attitude of this government, and et cetera, et cetera. So it's very, very sharp. There is no love lost between them. But I'll be honest with you, Gabriella, what astonishes me is how some people in Israel still say, hey, I think relations are still fantastic. And then I'm just like, where the hell is this coming from? There is a problem in the narrative, Gabriel. There's a problem in the narrative. And because maybe people would like to say they're holding on to this potential of Saudi normalization because it's so politically fruitful, uh, that there's almost a sense of denial that the Saudis are saying these things. And that's where the Saudis, I would say, have, I think, upped their game and their discursive output to communicate to them and others that, listen, we really have these grievances. It's there. So it's a very tense time.
Okay, I just want to, yeah, you've painted the picture very, very clearly. Just to step back a moment, um, what have the Saudis said about Hamas holding the hostages? Have they called on Hamas to release the hostages?
Yes, yes. They've said that they all hostages have to come back, and then a ceasefire. Yeah, and then this is tied with a ceasefire. That all hostages have to come back. Death of innocent civilians is wrong, um, and this has to be tied with a ceasefire, permanent ceasefire.
Mhm. So I'd like you to talk a little bit about Trump's recent visit to Saudi Arabia and what was the significance of that. And there are a few things there to unpack. I mean, what was accomplished for both parties? To what extent was Israel sidelined? Was that on? Do you think that was because Trump wanted to sideline them, or the Saudis wanted to sideline Israel? What is the how does this factor into the whole
Yeah.
picture?
Yeah, sure. So I think when Donald Trump came in, this was just to say a few words about this trip compared to the 2017 one.
Mhm.
So I think the 2017 trip was, in my opinion, a little bit larger because they invested not only in the Saudi-US relationship, but they invested also in Trump himself. And they invested in the idea that, here is someone that we would like to gain on our side, especially if, down the road. There, the relationship did bring about in the first administration, or the first term, did bring about some benefits, but also there were some disappointments, I would say, especially when Iran attacked some of the Saudi oil refineries in 2019. Donald Trump was very hesitant and did not respond and said, actually, if the Saudis want us to protect them, they're going to have to pay. So I think that was actually one of the reasons why Saudi began to seek a different approach to Iran in 2019. But this time, the significance of this relationship or this trip was that I think they knew there were things that they would get and there were things that they won't get. And one of the things that they didn't get, or I'm sorry, that yeah, they didn't get was that treaty because Donald Trump is averse to any kind of security pacts. So instead, they focused a great deal on the tech and investment file and they invested heavily on that. And for Saudi Arabia, that's very strategic because, we're talking about Saudi Arabia now, yet we never mention kind of this grand vision that Saudi Arabia has, which is the 2030 vision. And in this 2030 vision, basically, it's some sort of bearing um, towards diversifying Saudi's economy and kind of elevating Saudi into kind of the 21st century of and becoming a modern economy and a tech-driven economy, etc. So they got a lot on that, developed a lot of partnerships on that. When it comes to Israel, in my opinion, I think the thing, of course, Israel lost out because of something they were alluding to before the trip came out, which is the nuclear file. Saudi Arabia and the United States were in talks about a Saudi American nuclear cooperation. Um, this would have been under or part of the normalization package with Israel. But now we're beginning to see this get separated from Israel. And therefore, so all the perks that could have been there to normalize relations with Israel is beginning to gradually move away because now it's not being tied to Israel. And maybe because Donald Trump sees Israel here as a burden. Um, uh, and this is I mean, I can't profess to know Donald Trump. This is something we could share and talk about. But I have a feeling he's not he's not a flavor of the month in Canada these days. But anyways, he does see Israel as a burden. And therefore an obstacle to actually achieving a deal with Saudi Arabia. And therefore it was separated from this. Now, the American Saudi nuclear discussion in itself required a lot of hashing out of the details. Therefore, it wasn't ready, especially the 1, 2, 3 agreement as aspects of enrichment of uranium, but also of selling uranium, because Saudi wants to sell uranium because it does have a lot of uranium deposits. So I think it was a sign that we will do business between Saudi Arabia and the United States, and Israel won't have a say too much in that. And I think it was which for me makes it very interesting because I think there's no other way to avoid the Palestinian issue as well. And also another thing about, to go back to the question that you asked previously about normalization, in my PhD, I came to the conclusion that Saudi Arabia doesn't need to normalize relations with Israel to get what it wants from it. A lot of the policies were actually harmonious. I mean, there's a lot of covert discussion and talk. I don't focus too much on the covert discussions because that's very hard to pinpoint. It may happen and may not happen. It's very, very difficult to pinpoint. But for me, I actually look at the over, regional dynamics before, at least a few years ago, before October 7th. And many times they were harmonious. And so really, I could get what I want from Israel without the baggage that it comes with it. So this is also something that makes normalization with Israel even more elusive.
Yeah, very interesting. There's a conference, a UN conference, sponsored or maybe that's co-hosted by France and Saudi Arabia coming up in June, 17th of June, on the two-state solution, as I understand. Can you tell us a little bit about that? What are the goals? And I guess is this an attempt to somehow pressure or pressure Israel to to acting differently? And can that work? Can Israel be pressured by anybody else but the United States at this
Yeah,
point?
yeah, it's a good question. So I think the Saudi and French are co-chairing something. They actually met a few days ago for a preparatory talk in New York, and they are, you know, they've declared this, I think, even earlier in the year, or maybe late last year, that there is going to be the summit where they're going to impose a two-state solution. And here is where people said, what do you mean by imposement? Are things on the ground going to change? And I think, of course, anybody can follow this, that no, I think things on the ground won't change, clearly. But I think the diplomatic terrain is where it's at right now. And that's what this conference also aims for. In my opinion, I think the Saudis and others wanted to impose a diplomatic reality of that there is a two-state solution, that probably it's time for people to stand on the right side of justice and base a right side of history and say, listen, we've all been saying we've wanted it, we've wanted the two-state solution. This is the only way to do it, but many states have not crossed that line. Maybe it's time. Maybe it's time. Because the previous paradigm hasn't worked. The previous aspect of occupation hasn't worked. So maybe they could try this aspect by imposing a diplomatic reality. It's still early days to see, in my opinion, um, how will the United States react to this, and how will the US then probably be influenced to pressure this government by doing so. It's early days, but for me, what I would say is that, and this is in my recent work, what I've been trying to focus on, is that many people talk about the two-state solution and the Palestinian state and the integration of Israel, but it's probably time to start talking about the Palestinian state and the integration of Palestine into the region as well. I think it's also time to diversify our support towards the Palestinian issue, work more with Palestinians, Palestinian institutions, help develop these institutions, and help create a process of integration. This is what I think I've been trying to focus on. Moreover, I think what I've also been talking about is not just that, but also integration of Palestinian Israeli initiatives in the region too, and aspects and discussions of peace. So I think, this is of course, as a result, this is what I would like to see after June 2025. But we know that there's lots of working groups that are going to be declared. We just don't know the details yet. But it is clear that I think they are trying to change the contours, the diplomatic contours, the international diplomatic contours of this, and work that way. I think everyone knows nobody has leverage uh, uh, on Israel than the United States. And therefore, the discussion is with that, with them. Once there is some leeway or some momentum on that front, then we could probably see momentum towards a Palestinian Israeli healthy discussion that hasn't been there for years. But of course, anybody, as someone from the region, outside the Palestinian-Israeli spheres, sometimes I also don't. I underestimate probably the level of trauma there is, and just like how there's Palestinian trauma and Israeli trauma, there's also regional trauma. So it's going to be, it's going to be a process. We're going to have to make this a sustainable push towards keeping the discussion alive, fleshing out what are the necessities of the two-state solution, what are the necessities of the Palestinian state, um, uh, and to begin to think differently. Because also, and I'll just say this, the region has always played a role, or the GCC and Saudi Arabia played a financial role here. We're also embroiled in our own reconstruction of our own economy. So we can't spend as much as we can as we did before. But in my opinion, this is then an opportunity to not just use money to help, but also to begin a genuine process of integration, of institutional cooperation. It's going to be very difficult under occupation, but we're going to have to think creatively around this. And this is when I think international partners, even Canada, can have a role, as supplementary as it can be, because I think Canada also played a role in being one of the working groups after Madrid in the early 90s. It was heading the you remember that, Ruvana? It was heading the immigration aspect of immigration. So there are legacies that could be leveraged.
Okay, well, I personally have more questions to ask you, but I know our audience has some. So I'm going to hand it over, the microphone, so to speak, over to my colleague in Montreal, Reuven Schultz, to ask some of the audience questions. Go ahead, Reuven.
One of the questions from the audience is from Ralph Seliger, and he wants to know, was the failure of Camp David what prompted the Saudi Peace Initiative in 2002?
Yes, I argue it was. Of course, the Camp David, the Barak Arafat summit, if that's what he's referring to, then I think it was. And there was that discussion in 2022 or when Thomas Friedman of the New York Times kind of went to King Abdullah and said, "Hey, I heard you're trying to do something with the Palestinians," and he was like, or a peace initiative. He's like, "Did you break into my office?" And what he was saying is basically that, it, he was planning and drafting something, and so that's what led to the Saudi peace initiative in February 2002, which then led to the Arab Peace Initiative in March 2002. But just another thing, what stopped that from what kind of stopped it was there was the Intifada, but also 9/11, because 9/11 happened, and that's why there was that gap from 2000 to 2002. That's why it wasn't that, it didn't come straight afterwards.
Recently, and this is aside, I heard Thomas Friedman say what stopped it was the Hamas attack on Passover on the hotel, which changed public opinion significantly against any peace process. John Snippet asks, could Saudis make a deal with Israel if the PA would implode?
No.
Okay.
Not much there to say. Sorry about that, but no.
Yeah. Well, you said it during the course. Is there a contradiction between the great welcome Trump received and the continued U.S. support? This is from Barbara Landau. Is there a contradiction between the great welcome Trump received and the continued U.S. support for annexation?
I'm not sure I get the question.
Well, the United States is enabling the annexation of the West Bank.
Yeah, okay.
And at the same time, when Trump arrives to Saudi, he gets an incredible reception.
Yeah.
Is there a contradiction there?
This is what I think. It could be viewed as a contradiction when it's viewed in this file, but Saudi's approach to Trump right now is one of compartmentalization, in my opinion. So I think basically what I mean is that there are these different files that the Saudis would want to work with the United States, and they want to kind of they want to separate these files as much as they could. And therefore, it protects Saudi American interests, but at the same time, it doesn't leverage it to stuff like annexation or stopping annexation, et cetera, et cetera. So I think, it could be an issue. Could be an issue.
An associated question was that why hasn't Saudi Arabia taken a more forceful role in defending Gaza?
This is a good question. The question that comes immediately after that is, well, like what, or what kind of role? What can we do? What can any state do? And I think there is a sense of helplessness that we have in the region and internationally because of this American-Israeli relationship. The United States is still viewed as the main security partner for many countries, for all countries in the Gulf. But we all know that there is a crisis of leverage, and this is why I've been saying this before. There's a crisis of leverage. I don't even think cutting relations from the Abraham Accord countries would have even stopped Netanyahu from doing what he was doing. So I think it's an interesting. It's a very sobering reality, quite frankly.
Okay,
There's
David,
not much we could do.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that has come out the most in the last year and a half is the absence of support for the Gazans.
Yeah.
David Cohen asked about a security arrangement between Saudi Arabia. He said, what are the prospects from a Saudi perspective of a Saudi-U.S. accord on security to protect it from Iran and its proxies and Saudi access to U.S. nuclear civilian technology?
The prospects of this is predicated on the political landscape in the United States. I think the Saudis would want that. And that's what they asked for when it came to normalization with Israel. which, by the way, speaks to how Saudi views Israel. It doesn't view Israel. A lot of the times people will say, yes, Saudis are desperate to normalize with Israel. I don't think so. I think they're using the normalization card to get what they want from the United States, mostly. Otherwise, why would they put such lofty obstacles in between this relationship? So this is what they would want. The reality is, can they get it through the Senate? I think still we have an uphill battle when it comes to our perception in the United States. But I think it improved over the years. Saudi was always an easy target for people in the United States for political purposes. Um, so it's something that I think the Saudis are certainly trying to get. But let me just say this. There is also a discussion regarding uh, the credence and the utility, or how beneficial it is to get a treaty from the United States nowadays. Article 5. If we just look at NATO now and Article 5, and what the United States has been saying, or what Donald Trump has been saying, Article 5, Article 5 and NATO was viewed as the epitome of collective defense. Now there's big cracks. So how beneficial would that be if Saudi Arabia actually got it and then kind of created some sort of axis, an anti-Iran axis in the region? And then for political purposes, the United States will say, you know what, we're not going to be here any longer, or we're gonna be very reluctant in defending Saudi Arabia. And then they're going to restart the whole thing all over again. So I think, while Saudi Arabia wants it, I think Saudi Arabia still understands the limitation of it. That's why they're not going to adopt a process against Iran. They're going to get what they want from the United States, but they're not going to be against Iran. They're going to have a diversified dual approach.
Okay. I have another question from Varda Bernstein, and she says, I'll just take a look at it. She asks, why has the Arab world taken so long to engage with the cause of a Palestinian state that's pledged to non-aggression toward Israel and to supporting the Palestinian people economically and the maturation of a Palestinian leadership?
It's a good question. Some people immediately will respond and say, no, we've always been engaged. And some people say probably not enough. In my opinion, I think not enough in a particular way. In my opinion, also, I think this is also a result of just the nature of politics in the Middle East, which has been very government heavy, and focused a lot on kind of this government to government and not necessarily people to people. Of course, Palestinians are no strangers to us and our society. There are many people here that are Palestinians in the Gulf and elsewhere. But when you have that kind of institutionalized Palestinian Arab cooperation, that's always been missing, in my opinion. But also there has been tension, Palestinian Arab tension too. There's been tension. People look at what happened in Jordan. People look at what happened in Lebanon. Sometimes there are some unflattering things that come out from the streets about leaders and what they speak. And of course, while I acknowledge that is there, I make sure this is not we cannot generalize, because there are people that say great things about Saudi leaders and other leaders. But there is just that tension. And also, in my opinion, this is a result of a particular position towards the Palestinian issue of not being too close, but not being too far. And as a result, our understanding of the Palestinian issue is constructed because of that. And it's the same thing about Israel. And one of the things that I'm arguing is that we're now paying the price for not engaging enough with Israelis and Jewish organizations that actually support what we want, which is basically a two-state solution, peace and integrity and respect, for everyone. And so I think this also speaks to a sensitivity of this topic of Israel. One of the things I've been arguing time and again is how we are operating within other people's frames. Everyone is asking us questions. The understanding of Saudi is not being framed by Saudis. It's being framed by other non-Saudis. And this is a result, we need to start catching up with this. And I think we've picked up on this in recently and said, yeah, I think we have to start up in the game now. And also, I think this is when we should have been engaged with more diversified Palestinian, diversified who we talk to in Palestine and in Israel.
I have a question. Has the situation in Gaza caused a radicalization in Saudi Arabia? That is there a growing sense of alienation from the government?
No, not yet. Not yet. But I'll be very honest. This is something many people are afraid of. Why? Because we've seen people be radicalized in Saudi and recruited, and recruiters of Al-Qaeda have used the Palestinian issue time and again for their cause. And where many people probably don't know this, but when in the 2000s, I remember this vividly, we have been at the receiving end of a tsunami of attacks from Al-Qaeda. And later on, when I actually grew up and started to research this more, you see the language, the Palestinian issue, and the injustice of our association with the United States, and how controversial that was because of the United States' relationship with Israel. That was such a galvanizing, a strong recruiting tactic. And by the way, MBS, our Crown Prince, alluded to this in an interview in August of last year, 2024, where he said, listen, you want me to normalize relations, but do you remember what happened with Sadat? And again, it goes back to some of the questions I was talking about with the Gabriella, which is we're going through a very transformational period where there's a lot of things that are happening. So this is a security threat. This is a regional security threat, what's happening. This is why there needs to be discussions on proper solution, but also this has potential to really, lead to very concerning things inside all countries in the region.
I'm going to look at the questions. David Cohen again has a question. Do Saudis make a difference between Israelis and Jews in the diaspora?
This is a good question. I think recently we started to make that difference. Recently, we started it started to become more clear. I think before, because our worldview, or many people in the society's worldview, was basically Muslim, Jewish, and Christian. And therefore, Israel is lumped up into this Jewish kind of Israeli aspect. So there was not enough, I think, development on this regard. And this is something that, I personally have been trying to working on to show this. And, in fact, not only is it just the difference between Jews and Israelis, the difference, but even the difference between Israelis themselves. So one of the terms that I use is the Netanyahu regime, because I want to make sure that there are people in Israel that are not with this kind of tendency, and then there are Jews around the world that are, that we are very aligned. And I think also the more we've been exposed and meeting people outside, the better that was. The better that was. And I think it's a result of just a lack of interaction. And I think that's something we need to work on.
Gabriella, did you want to say something?
Well, I think we're coming close to the end of the hour, and that we unfortunately need to move along. I just to try to wrap up on something a little more a more positive note. Aziz, would you give us just a personal statement about why you're so interested in the subject? What are your hopes uh, what do you hope? Yeah, your vision for the future. And yeah.
I well, first, I just want to say thank you so much for giving me the opportunity here to talk with you all and build a new friendship also with everyone here. Um, so when I started this research, in my undergraduate degree, I began to develop this and try to really look at the Saudi-Israeli relationship. But then this led me obviously to the Palestinian-Israeli question. And one of the things that really motivates me as a researcher and someone who has, I think, began to dedicate my life now to this. That's why I'm an independent researcher, because I don't want anything to take me away from what I'm doing now, is that believe that we were really close to getting peace. I genuinely believe we were almost there. We could have gotten it. And had it been for a different culture, had it been for a different discussion, had it been for a different push from the civil society, people that said, the domestic costs would have been less, probably there would have been more domestic support. We could have been there. And that's what motivates me. And I think for me, I want to build upon that rather than kind of go into the name, the blame game. Because that's something that I really want to avoid and really been or really been avoiding. And I genuinely believe that peace is tangible. As much as hard as it is out there, I believe we didn't put our efforts in the right ways. And this is the benefit of hindsight, of course, but we could have gotten there. And I really believe we can get it. I really believe it's difficult, but I think with the right with the right discourses, with the right incentives, with the right culture, the Arab-Israeli culture, um, and Arab-Jewish culture, really, on a broader level, we could get there. It's just about a process, and that's what I
And,
that's
and
what.
just quickly, when you say peace, what do you mean by that? Like what just broadly speaking, what vision do you have there?
I think where my intention one day is to say, well, here is a Palestinian, and then this doesn't mean terrorist, and here's an Israeli or a Jewish person, and doesn't mean who's against me or anti-Arab. And I think having that, of course, and what I also mean on the political landscape as well, that there is a political solution that everyone kind of finds justifiable, and everyone finds kind of good for at least the time being. I think we could do that, and we can get tangible political outcomes. It's very difficult. I don't like to be a naysayer, but we have no other option because the alternative, the way this is going, is not good for anybody. Genuinely not good for anybody in the region. Not good for Palestinians or Israelis. And trust me when I say this, not good for anybody. Not good for Jordan. And if there's instability in Jordan, what does that mean for the northern part of Saudi Arabia? And what does that mean, northern part of Saudi Arabia, where there's over $500 billion worth of investments there with the mega cities that they're doing, the Red Sea that we're investing. This is simply not good for anybody. Um, and so we have no other choice but to focus on this two-state solution, whatever that may look like. But that's the direction that we have to take.
Well, thank you so much, Aziz. I'm sure you could talk. Well, I'm sure people would like to hear more, but we do have to wrap it up. Thank you for sharing your expertise, for giving us so much insight. I've learned an awful lot. I'm sure other people have as well. And we certainly sincerely share your passion for peaceful change, and and we'll continue working for that.
Absolutely.
And I invite our audience to consider going to that other webinar at 2:30 if they wish, and stay tuned for other webinars from Canadian Friends of Peace now, and stay connected with us. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Aziz, very much, and thank you, Gabriella.
And
Really,
thank you,
this was
Ruben.
great.
Pardon me, I forgot to thank you.
No, it's okay. Thank you.
Thank you all, Ruben. Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate this. And you have a partner in me. Stand shoulder to shoulder with you guys. Thank you all.
Thank you, Aziz.
Okay.
Bye, Gabriella.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone. Aziz, I think you could just leave.
Okay. Okay. Fantastic. I
think our yeah. Thanks a lot.
All righty. Take care. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much again.
My pleasure. It was such a pleasure. Such a
Yes.
pleasure. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.